I never thought I'd end up telling this story. Hell, I never thought I'd even survive it. But here I am, sitting at my kitchen table, telling you about the night I worked my last shift at that godforsaken gas station on Route 46. If you've got time, grab a drink and settle in. It's not a quick story, but I promise it's one you won't forget. So, let me set the scene. It was a Tuesday night, one of those endless quiet ones where the world feels dead. The kind of night where the hum of the fluorescent lights is the loudest sound you hear for hours. I was covering for Steve, the regular night guy. He'd called in sick, or maybe just drunk. Hard to tell with him. I didn't mind at first. I needed the extra cash, and honestly I figured it'd be an easy shift. Boy, was I wrong. It started off normal enough. A couple of regulars came in, truckers mostly, grabbing coffee or snacks to keep them awake. They'd nod, maybe say a quick, "How's it going?" and be on their way. By 11:30, the place was dead. Just me and the buzz of the lights. Around midnight, the first weird thing happened. I was restocking the cooler in the back when I heard the door chime. I poked my head out from behind the shelves, expecting to see someone walk in, but no one was there. The door was wide open, though, letting the cold night air rush in. I walked over, glanced outside, nothing. Just the empty parking lot and the highway stretching out into the darkness. I shrugged it off. Maybe the wind had caught the door or something. I closed it, locked it, and went back to restocking. But then, as soon as I stepped away, the chime went off again. This time, I felt it, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I'm not one to spook easily, but there was something about that moment that just didn't feel right. I checked the door again, still nothing. No cars, no people, just the eerie silence of the night. I locked it again, double-checked it this time, and told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was tired, long shift and all that, but things only got weirder from there. About an hour later, I was sitting behind the counter, flipping through some old magazine someone had left behind. That's when the phone rang. Now, let me tell you something. No one ever calls the gas station at night. Ever. I figured it was Steve, maybe checking in, so I picked up without thinking. "Hello?" I said. At first there was nothing, just static. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A voice, faint and distorted, like it was coming from far away. "Don't go outside." I froze. What? Who is this? The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this some kind of prank? Maybe one of the truckers messing with me? But it didn't feel like a joke. That voice, it was shaky, desperate, like someone was barely holding it together. I put the phone down and tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a wrong number, someone playing around. Yeah, that had to be it. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't ignore the way my hands were shaking. The rest of the night felt like it was crawling by. I kept glancing at the clock, willing it to be morning. Every little sound made me jump. The hum of the cooler, the rustle of the wind outside. I felt like I was being watched, like there were eyes on me that I couldn't see. Around 3 a.m., the real horror began. The door chime went off again. This time, I didn't even hesitate. I shot up from my chair and stared at the door. It was open again, swinging slowly, like someone had just walked in. But the parking lot was still empty, and the highway was silent. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Anyone there?" No answer. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept behind the counter and stepped around the register. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I walked to the door, my fingers gripping the bat so tight my knuckles were white. And then I saw it, out by the gas pumps, standing in the pale glow of the overhead lights, was a figure. At first I thought it was just someone in a hoodie, maybe a hitchhiker or someone needing a fill-up. But as I squinted, I realized something was off. The figure wasn't moving. just standing there, perfectly still. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty lot. "You need help?" No response. I stepped closer, my shoes crunching on the gravel. The figure didn't budge, didn't flinch, just stood there like a statue. And then as I got within a few feet, I saw its face, or lack of one. There was nothing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin where a face should have been. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting in knots. The thing tilted its head, like it was studying me, and then it took a step forward. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I bolted back inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the key. I backed away from the door, clutching the bat like it was the only thing keeping me alive. For the next few hours I stayed behind the counter, watching the door and praying that thing wouldn't come back. Every so often, I'd hear faint tapping on the windows or the sound of footsteps outside, but I didn't dare look. When the sun finally came up, it was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. The noises stopped, the air felt lighter, and when I finally worked up the courage to step outside, the lot was empty, no figure, no signs of anything out of the ordinary. I quit that day, didn't even bother to tell Steve. I just left my key on the counter and walked out. Whatever I saw that night, I never want to see it again. And if you ever find yourself on Route 46, do yourself a favor. Stay away from that gas station. Trust me, it's not worth the risk. But I guess that's not where this story ends, is it? See, even though I quit, I couldn't get that night out of my head. For weeks after, I had nightmares. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the door chime in my dreams, or seeing that faceless figure standing at the edge of my bed. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, that I was just rattled from the experience. But deep down, I knew better. The weird thing is, I started noticing stuff around town after that night. Little things, you know? Like the gas station's lot always seemed wrong. Even if I drove past during the day, there'd be this heavy feeling like the air itself was thicker there. And people who worked the night shift? They didn't last long. A week, 2 weeks, tops. Then they'd quit, just like me. There was one guy, Danny, who took over after I left. I ran into him at the diner a couple of weeks later, and he looked like hell. Dark circles under his eyes, shaking hands, that kind of thing. I asked him how the job was going, and all he said was, "It's quiet." The way he said it, though, it sounded more like a warning than an answer. He didn't stick around much longer, either. The stories started piling up, too. People would say they saw weird shadows in the windows at night, or that their car radios would cut out when they stopped for gas. A couple of truckers even swore they saw the pumps turn on by themselves, spewing gasoline all over the lot. And then there was that one guy, Paul, I think his name was. He was a regular, always stopping by for coffee during his night shifts at the warehouse down the road. One night, he didn't show up for work. They found his truck abandoned in the gas station lot the next morning. Keys still in the ignition, coffee cup still sitting in the cup holder, but Paul gone. No one ever saw him again. I tried to forget about all of it, move on with my life. But the thing about an experience like that is, it sticks with you. It's like a splinter under your skin, always there, always itching. And no matter how hard you try to ignore it, it never really goes away. A year after I quit, I finally broke down and decided to do some digging. I don't know what I was looking for. Closure, maybe, or just some kind of explanation. I started asking around, talking to some of the old-timers in town. Most of them didn't have much to say, but one guy, Old Joe, he told me something that still gives me chills. Back in the day, he said, that land wasn't just empty like it is now. There was a house there, big place, old and creaky. Belonged to a guy named Carson, some kind of recluse. Nobody knew much about him except that he was into some weird stuff. Rituals, seances, that kind of thing. Joe leaned in closer, lowering his voice. They say one night Carson tried something he shouldn't have. Some kind of summoning, or so the story goes. Whatever he called up, it didn't go back. Folks said they heard screams coming from the house, but when the sheriff went to check it out, the place was empty, burned to the ground a week later. I sat there staring at him, trying to process what he was saying. So, what? You think that place is haunted or something? Joe shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it's worse than that. Whatever Carson brought into this world, it's still there, waiting, feeding. I didn't sleep much that night. Hell, I haven't slept much since. Now, here's the part that's going to sound crazy. A few months ago, I got a call from Danny, the guy who took over after me. He was rambling, talking fast, like he was terrified. He said he'd seen it. The figure. Said it wasn't just outside this time. It was inside, standing by the counter, watching him. I can't do this anymore, man, he said. I think it wants something. I don't know what, but it's not gonna stop. I told him to get out of there, to quit like I did, but he didn't listen. A week later, Danny was gone. His car was found parked in the same spot as Paul's, and just like Paul, there was no trace of him. Now every time I drive past that gas station, I feel it. This pull, like it wants me to stop, like it's calling me back. And maybe that's the worst part of all, because some nights when the nightmares get too bad and I wake up in the dark, I think about going back, about stepping through those doors one last time, just to see if it's still there. But I don't. At least not yet. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that some places are better left alone. And that gas station? It's one of them. You'd think that'd be the end of it, right? You quit, you move on, and you let the nightmares fade. But life doesn't always work like that. I thought I could escape it, but it wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. It started small. Just little things that felt off. Like my TV turning to static in the middle of the night, or my front door being unlocked when I was sure I'd bolted it. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. That gas station had done a number on my nerves, and I figured I was just imagining things. But then the dreams started again. Only this time they were different. More vivid. I'd find myself back at the gas station, standing behind the counter. The lights would flicker, the chime would go off, and I'd see it. The faceless figure standing outside the glass, just staring. But the dreams didn't stop there. No, they always ended the same way. The figure would suddenly be inside, inches from my face, and it would whisper something. I could never make out the words, but the sound of it. It wasn't human. It was like nails scraping across metal, mixed with the hiss of static. And then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. One night, after another one of those dreams, I woke up to find something that froze me in my bed. On my nightstand, where I always kept my phone and keys, there was a receipt, a gas station receipt. It had my name on it, scrawled in shaky, jagged handwriting. The timestamp, 3:12 a.m., the exact time I woke up. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I couldn't. I sat on the couch staring at that receipt, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that I hadn't somehow been back there without remembering. But deep down I knew the truth. It wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning I decided to do the one thing I swore I'd never do again. I got in my car and drove to the gas station. It was broad daylight, but even then, the place looked wrong. The windows were grimy, like no one had cleaned them in years, and the pumps were covered in a thin layer of dust. There was no one inside, at least not that I could see. I parked at the edge of the lot and just sat there for a while, trying to work up the nerve to go in. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to never come back. But I couldn't. I had to know. The door chime sounded as I stepped inside, and I felt it instantly, that same oppressive weight in the air, like the place itself was alive and watching me. The shelves were still stocked, though everything looked a little off. Cans slightly dented, labels faded, like they'd been sitting there for decades. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering just enough to make me uneasy. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. I walked to the counter, my footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. The register was still there, along with the old beat-up stool I used to sit on. It was like nothing had changed. But as I looked closer, I noticed something. The receipt printer was still running, spitting out a long strip of paper. The words were gibberish, just random letters and symbols. But at the bottom, there was one thing I recognized. My name. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a rack of chips. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the cooler door, just behind me, was the figure. Faceless, motionless, standing so close I should have been able to feel its breath, if it had any. I spun around, but the space behind me was empty. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. Something was pulling me deeper, dragging me toward the back room. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, the stench hit me. Rot, decay, the kind of smell that clings to your skin and makes you want to vomit. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of a single bulb swinging overhead, and in the center of the room was a trap door. I didn't even know the gas station had a basement. Against every ounce of common sense I had left, I opened it. The hinges groaned, and a rush of cold air hit me, carrying that awful smell. A rickety wooden ladder led down into the darkness. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring into that black void, telling myself to turn around and leave. But then I heard it, the voice from my dreams. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. It was coming from below. "Come. Back." I climbed down. The basement was worse than I had imagined. The walls were lined with shelves, each one holding jars filled with cloudy liquid. Inside the jars were things I can't even begin to describe. Twisted, deformed shapes that looked almost human, but not quite. The air was thick, heavy, and every breath felt like it was weighing me down. In the center of the room was a circle drawn in what looked like dried blood, with strange symbols surrounding it, and standing in the middle of the circle was the figure. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its presence, like it was staring right through me. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. It tilted its head, the same way it had that first night, and for the first time it spoke. "You brought me here." I froze, my mind raced, trying to understand what it meant. I didn't bring anything, I'd barely been surviving since I left that place. But then it hit me, old Joe's story, Carson's ritual, whatever had been summoned that night so many years ago had been trapped here, bound to the gas station. And by quitting, by running away, I'd somehow let it out. It took a step toward me and I backed up, my legs shaking. "I didn't do anything," I shouted. "I didn't. You opened the door." Its voice was louder now, echoing in the small space, and I realized it wasn't talking about the trap door. It meant the night I first saw it, when I opened the gas station door to look outside. I'd invited it in. Before I could react, the lights went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, getting closer and closer, and then, just as I felt its cold presence inches from me, everything went silent. I woke up outside, lying on the gravel lot as the morning sun rose. The gas station was gone. No building, no pumps, nothing, just an empty patch of land. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that spot. I haven't been back since, and I never plan to. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the door chime in my dreams, and every time, I wonder if it's waiting for me. That's for today. If you like our horror stories, then subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon. Thanks in advance.